So previously to meaning today, we left off in the middle of chapter 13 as, remember, there was the 10 plagues and the 10th plague being the worst. And that one was the death of all of Egypt's oldest children in defiance of Pharaoh. We've been conditioned to know that Pharaoh's heart is hardened, and this probably, as horrific as this solution is, it's probably not going to do the trick for Pharaoh. And now Israel, even though Israel set free, we kind of think that can't quite possibly be the end of Pharaoh in this story. So the Israelites are now fleeing and heading back towards their home. And this is where we're leaving off. This is kind of where we're picking up the story as they're heading kind of in the direction. If you can, I wish I had a map for you, I'm sorry, but let me reverse my hands. So you're kind of moving from Egypt, Suez Canal, you know, where the boat was stuck, kind of over there, Cairo-ish area, and then you're moving up the coast, kind of around the curve of the Mediterranean back to Canaan, which is what they call it now, modern day Israel and Palestine. And I'm going to start with the CEB Women's Study Bible, which is, I think, the one Mary has. And I'm reading at verse 17 of chapter 13. When Pharaoh let the people go, God didn't lead them by way of the land of the Philistines, even though that was the shorter route. God thought, if the people have to fight and face war, they will run back to Egypt. So God led the people by the roundabout way of the Reed Sea desert. The Israelites went up out of the land of Egypt ready for battle. Moses took with him Joseph's bones, just as Joseph had made Israel's sons promise when he said to them, when God takes care of you, you must carry my bones out of here with you. They set out from Succoth and camped at Etham on the edge of the desert. The Lord went in front of them during the day in a column of cloud to guide them, and at night in a column of lightning to give them light. This way they could travel during the day and at night. The column of cloud during the day and the column of lightning at night never left its place in front of the people. Couple interesting things there. Let me quickly tell you that there's discrepancies in the Hebrew originally, whatever original is, of reed and red, and we think that's the same thing. So Red Sea, Reed Sea could be interchangeable. I have a footnote in mine, actually, the letter U. What does that mean? Or yeah, it could be Red Sea. But what's your say?
Mine has Red Sea in the text, and then below it says, or the Sea of Reeds.
There you go. So there's some kind of textual issue happening, and nobody really is certain. It's kind of amazing still. Is it still called the Red Sea? I don't think so. I think we're talking about the Nile. I don't think there is actually a sea.
They don't, according to the people, the guy I read, they're not sure where this water is.
Yeah, got it.
It could be any piece of water that they had to go through between there and that. It's just it was just more of a symbolism of trying to get out of there, and the idea of the water being important.
Very
around.
Yeah, exactly.
And but anyway, it could have been any piece of water. They really not sure, because there's nothing really there called the Red Sea.
That's right.
According to his history.
Yeah.
According to the book I read
and
about
I think it was later named the Red Sea because it was just so familiarly known as that. But we're really talking about the kind of Egyptian Delta area. Because the Pharaoh would have been in Cairo, unless I'm completely off. That's the major metropolis, so to speak. So that would mean it wouldn't make sense for them to go all the way down towards like Somalia. They would go the path of least resistance, as it just said here. So they would kind of be, I would suspect they would actually be following the curve of the Mediterranean if they were going literally, because at least they know what direction they're going. So the other thing they say here is Joseph's bones. And I bet if David were here, he might support me in saying that the problem with this is it's because it's merging multiple traditions, that you want to go like, where did the bones come from? It's the first time we mentioned Joseph, somebody, so now they've just got a sack of bones, or they're carrying it like in an ark, kind of like this. That's certainly possible, but clearly there was a tradition that, to fulfill, I don't even know scripture, because it's not in scripture, because what it's referencing here doesn't have any reference. But anyway, there's this tradition that somebody felt was important to put in here that, oh yeah, and to fulfill the prophecy or whatever, they carried Joseph's bones back to his home in his land. It's really more symbolic. These are the descendants of Joseph, and now they're coming back in. Well, the descendants of Abraham, really, and they're marching back home triumphantly, well, we think triumphantly. And then the last thing I want to point out while I grab another resource is, what word do you all, I have column of cloud or column of lightning. What words do you have in your Bibles?
I have pillar.
Pillar of cloud, yeah.
Pillar of cloud and pillar of fire.
Fire.
Excellent.
Yeah.
I've got to remember, I'm going to make a note to scan this book, but I mentioned this book last time, and it's called The Bible with Sources Revealed.
My husband just bought that.
He did?
David just,
Because
yeah,
I
he
because
just
he meant I
bought that.
mentioned it last time. Richard Friedman.
He loves studying that kind of stuff, really big time. So
This stuff is
yeah,
really
yeah,
cool.
he just picked it up, and I think he bought another one, some kind of a commentary that goes along with it, I think.
Yeah, so this is down in the rabbit hole, metaphorically speaking. And it's hard to see here, so I'm going to make better scans for next time. But you see how you can kind of see the fonts are different types and they're different colors, and some of them are highlighted and some of them are green. All of that is reflective. This is the chapter we were just looking at, or the section we were just looking at. This is entirely reflective of different traditions. So Friedman, the author here, has taken basically bit by bit, word for word, gone through and separated out which tradition wrote what. And the traditions each are assigned a letter. It could be more than that, but they basically condense it to mainly just 4 letters, J, E, P, and D. And each of those different colors corresponds to a different tradition, sometimes hundreds or even thousands of years apart. So I'm going to look for the part we just did. Joseph's bones is all one tradition, and then at verse 20, it changes traditions to a completely different one, just for that one sentence, verse 20. They traveled from Succoth and camped in Etham at the edge of the wilderness. So that kind of is a clue that somebody inserted that line because they wanted to get that geography down in print. That
Greg, what do you mean by tradition? It switches to tradition. I don't
think of it like school. Think of it like the gospel writers. Imagine if there was one book with all 4 gospels, and there was disagreement within the text. So I mean, like a tradition would be like Matthew, Mark, or Luke, or John. So author.
Okay.
But it's really
Okay.
hard. It's hard to say that this is one author. In fact, it's extremely unlikely. It's probably a group of authors or a school, kind of like Paul and his descendants. But they're kind of clumped together by generation, if that makes any sense. So,
But who clumped them together?
I'm sorry, what's that question, Mary?
Who clumped them together? Which tradition?
That is the great mystery.
You have to remember, probably these sources were written not till like 1200 BCE or around that time. And so you have to remember that we had there was an oral tradition at the time. And so a lot of people were telling stories, and one story might have one thing, and another story might have similar things, but added a few little extras. So when all these stories ended up getting written down at some point, we don't even know when that is exactly, but when they put them all together, they kind of put little pieces together of different parts of the story to get the whole story somehow for their way of thinking. That's my understanding.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And the next chapter, for example, is going to roughly almost every verse switches switches narrators, basically. You would, I mean, again, if you view the text literally, you'd think it's all one writer, right? Or probably if you viewed it literally, you think God wrote all this, sat down and wrote all this. Okay, forgetting that. What scholars believe happened is it's kind of like saying, see Jane run. And then 100 years later, somebody goes, see Jane run down the hill. See Jane run faster. Then 200 years later, somebody goes, see Dick and Jane run down the hill. And, and so people modifying the story so that actually at some point, hundreds of years have passed and yet nobody remembers how the story was originally written. And it's all kind of meshed together. That's one tradition. It's kind of like looking at a view of the universe. Then 500 years later, somebody comes in and goes, we got to fix all this. I want to add in all the stuff about the geography, that they went to Succoth, that they went to Etham. So they didn't change anything. They simply added stuff in to the story and fleshed it out. Chapter 14, which is a really important chapter here, goes back and forth between all of these traditions, which might together be anywhere from 500 to 2,000 years apart. And then chapter 15, according to my scholar here, is virtually all one source. So wow. It's we'd have to do a deep dive on this separately, but I just wanted you to see that often when you're approaching a problem in the text, it may have, most likely, especially for this book and Genesis and the other 5 books, it probably has something to do with which tradition wrote it or which school wrote what part, down to the sentence, So there you go. One of the clues is how they refer to God. And we've talked about the name of God and how sometimes you get God, just the word G-O-D, and sometimes you get Lord with a little capital O-R-D. That's kind of a clue that it's a different tradition talking. And the biggest example of the 2 traditions is Genesis 1 and 2, the 2 creation stories. Those are 2 entirely, it's like Genesis 1 is one tradition, Genesis 2 is another tradition entirely different. And somebody just put them together. Somebody's. We shouldn't say one person did this. This is the work of many people. It's just because it's in antiquity, it's not documented how they did this. Nobody kept notes. You just kind of have it. And nobody knows where it came from. So it's really amazing that this is like anthropology, archaeology. It's those kind of things that they're using to find out the details here. Okay. We've only read 1 paragraph. Let's keep going. Chapter 14. I'm going to switch and read from a different source. This is Robert Alter's. Barb, this is one you and I were talking about. There we go. All right, chapter 14. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the Israelites that they turn back and encamp before Pi-hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea, before Baal-zephon. Oppose it, you shall camp. By the sea, opposite it you shall camp.
You shall camp opposite it.
Yeah, you shall camp opposite. I don't know why it's written like Yoda. And Pharaoh had said of the Israelites, they are confused in the land. The wilderness has closed round them. Okay, so there's the Pharaoh's threat. And I shall toughen Pharaoh's heart, this is God talking, and he will pursue them, that I may gain glory through Pharaoh and through all his force. And the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord. And thus they did do. Okay, stopping right there. To me, this is echoed in Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead, to name one of many examples in the Gospels. Because Jesus, I believe in John, prays that God may be glorified through what Jesus is about to do, that God may give Jesus the power to raise Lazarus, and that God will be glorified by everyone witnessing it. So this is marketing. This is God in many ways saying, I'm going to demonstrate why I am God, how I am God, by doing something so spectacular that it's going to put the frogs and the locusts to shame. And it's not about death of innocence this time. It's about the rescue of Israel, because Pharaoh and his army are not going to make it through this, as you probably knew from Sunday school. It's not, we don't focus on that, because that's not, they're not interested in telling that part of the story about who's culpable for these deaths. It's about it's not about justice. It's about God's favorite people, God's chosen people, Israel, and how he's saving them. Okay, just had to get that out there. Continuing on with verse 5, and it was told to the king of Egypt, aka the Pharaoh, that the people had fled, and Pharaoh and his servants had a change of heart about the people. And they said, what is this we have done, that we sent off Israel from our service? And he hardened his chariot, and his troops he took with him. And he took 600 picked chariots, and all the chariots of Egypt, and the captains over it all. And the Lord toughened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he pursued the Israelites, with the Israelites going out with a high hand. And the Egyptians pursued them and overtook them and camped by the sea, all the horses of Pharaoh's chariots and his riders and his force at Pi-hahiroth before Baal-zephon. And Pharaoh drew near, and the Israelites raised their eyes and look, or maybe it says in your text, behold, or lo, Egypt was advancing towards them, and they were very afraid. And the Israelites cried out to the Lord. This was a movie or a TV show, we'd cut to black and say, to be continued. This is them ratcheting the stakes, right? And you could see how these texts, Israelites of this time, Hebrews maybe to this day, well, I'm saying Jews, not Hebrews, but have this passage committed to heart. This is like, for God so loved the world, he gave them his only son for us. This is important. Okay, so important, I forgot where I was. Here we go. And they said to Moses, was it for lack of graves in Egypt that you took us to die in the wilderness? What is this you have done to us to bring us out of Egypt? Is this the thing we spoke to you in Egypt, saying, leave us alone that we may serve Egypt, for it is better for us to serve Egypt than for us to die in the wilderness. The people are saying, God, why did you even make us do this? We'd rather just stay in bondage. Now we're going to die. It's just heartbreaking. And the lack of faith, you want, again, it beckons Jesus coming and saying, ye of little faith. That's not, all of those Jesus stories are in many ways intentionally evoking the same feelings here. And Moses said to the people, do not be afraid. Just like Jesus just last week in our gospel said, peace be with you. What are you afraid of? Do not be afraid. Take your station and see the Lord's deliverance that he will do for you today. For as you see the Egyptians today, you shall not see them again for all time. The Lord shall do battle for you, and you shall keep still. And the Lord said to Moses, why do you cry out to me? Speak to the Israelites that they journey onward. As for you, raise your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea and split it apart. It's almost like a song here, that the Israelites may come into the midst of the sea on dry land. As for me, look, I am about to toughen the heart of the Egyptians, that they may come after them. And I shall gain glory through Pharaoh and through all his force, through his chariots and through his riders. And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord when I gain glory through Pharaoh. There's intentional repetition here of God saying this. Through his chariots, through his riders. And the messenger of God that was going before the camp of Israel moved and went behind them. That's interesting. And the pillar or the column of cloud moved from before them and stood behind them. So very supernatural here. It's like almost like a tornado's kind of blocking them. And Moses stretched out, skipped a line. And it came between the camp of Egypt and the camp of Israel, and there was the cloud and the dark, and it lit up the night, and they did not draw near each other all night. Think of the implications here. You can almost hear it in the text. And it was day and it was night, the first day. And it was dark and it was light. Gives you cold chills. This has all been building to this moment for the Israelites. And Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord led the sea with a mighty east wind all night. And he, capital He, made the sea dry ground. And the waters were split apart. And the Israelites came into the sea on dry land, the waters a-wall to them on their right and on their left. And the Egyptians pursued and came after them, all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, his riders, into the sea. And it happened in the morning watch that the Lord looked out over the camp of Egypt in a pillar of fire and cloud, and he panicked the camp of Egypt. Interesting word choice there. And he took off the wheels of their chariots and drove them heavily. And Egypt said, let me flee before Israel, for the Lord does battle for them against Egypt. And the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand over the sea, that the waters go back over the Egyptians, over the chariots, over their riders. And Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the sea went back toward morning to its full flow, with the Egyptians fleeing towards it. And the Lord shook out the Egyptians into the sea, and the water came back and covered the chariots and the riders of all Pharaoh's force who were coming after them in the sea. Not a single one of them remained. And the Israelites went on dry land in the midst of the sea, the waters a wall to them on the right and on their left. And the Lord on that day delivered Israel from the hand of Egypt. And Israel saw Egypt dead on the shore of the sea. And Israel saw the great hand that the Lord had performed against Egypt. And the people feared the Lord, and they trusted in the Lord and in Moses, his servant. Whew, and that should have been the end of the book. What a finale. But it's not. We're not even halfway. Okay, I read all that kind of intentionally uninterrupted, except for my interruptions. What sticks out to you? What made you curious, or what did you observe, or was
Well,
it?
if you are from North Carolina or Virginia, you totally know when there's a sandbar.
Yeah.
Like you can totally visualize this. This is a real thing. It's not. I guess, but there's no mention of timing in here.
Yeah.
So if you're that far behind, then yeah, the sandbar could have totally disappeared.
Yeah.
So
It's.
I mean, I'm the practical person in the group. I don't, the miracle.
That's
The
all.
miracle to me of the Virgin Mary is that Joseph actually married her, not that she was a virgin.
Right.
I'm very practical.
You're not wrong. You're not wrong.
So that's
Greg,
I'm
Yeah,
seeing this.
absolutely, Sarah. Yeah, Mary.
I still don't have my glasses, so I can't read this very well, but is what happened that the sea turned back and the Egyptians turned back and then it overflowed them?
The
Yeah,
Egyptians were drowned.
yeah, they drowned. So
Right, but I mean, doesn't it say that the Egyptians turned back when they saw what was happening or not?
yeah, they tried to turn around and get back to the place where they entered the water, but it was
Okay,
too late. It was too late. The water piled back in.
thank you.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe next week I'll bring a clip from Raiders of the Lost Ark. I'm sure you've all seen it, but a lot of this reminds me of the finale, because it's I don't want to just laugh off the difficult part of this, that God is killing people. But again, it's in service of a story of Israel being saved. From Israel's point of view, which is the only point of view of this story. There's no other point of view except Israel, the people who were saved. It wasn't so much that God killed anybody as God rescued them. Does that make a difference, you see?
Mhm.
Today we would say, how could God do that? It must have been a way he could have saved all the lives. Well, in Israel's defense, God gave Pharaoh ample opportunity. And Pharaoh always revealed, I mean, obviously there's the phrase, I harden their heart, but on its surface, God gave, and probably historically too, there was so many opportunities for Pharaoh to let them go. As Moses said, let my people go. And Pharaoh could not let it go. And so Pharaoh becomes kind of a King Lear or King Richard III or something, almost Shakespearean, going, you can picture him sitting on his throne, and it's like, servants going, you'll get other slaves, no big deal, you're Pharaoh, you got everything you want. And he goes, I can't believe I let them get away. I can't believe I let their God win. And that's his falling. If I were telling the story today, that's how I would tell it. And he goes back and he kind of meets his own demise. So in Raiders of the Lost Ark, and again, I'll show this next week, they open the Ark of the Covenant, which comes later in the Bible. And Indiana Jones has the fortitude to say, don't look at it. So everybody else gets caught up in their own personal, all the Nazis, all the villains are caught up in the fortune and glory, to use the other Indiana Jones reference. And that's where their folly is, the kind of human folly of revenge, of torture, of evil, and that's kind of what's happening to Pharaoh all here. But again, we can't wash over the fact, no pun intended, that God killed these people. Let's be real here. However, from Israel's point of view, it's they were supposed to be killed because they had to be killed in order for Israel to be delivered. And the text changes in verse 30, and I'm looking at my sources here. Yep. This is a source change. So again, a tradition change. So written either earlier or later. Verse 30 is basically a new school of thought that basically, I was clued into it because it starts using the word Israel instead of the Israelites or Moses's people or whatever the text is. All of a sudden it changes. So these last verses have something, they sound different, and they sound like something in a prayer almost, or recited at a Seder. And the Lord on that day delivered Israel from the hand of Egypt, and Israel saw Egypt dead on the shore of the sea, that kind of thing. So it's again cataclysmic for the history of Israel, but it's amazing how it's just amazing how we can get lost in what's actually happening here if we're not focused on the context of everything. But I can't wait to scan this for next time, and we'll go back over this closer to just show you how many different traditions formed the text that we're looking at. And this is from thousands and thousands of years ago. Maybe not thousands and thousands, but thousands. Well, what other things stuck out to you, or things that you were puzzled by anywhere, little or big, little or small?
Well, I guess for me, it was just, again, the wilderness versus the desert, what word they chose to use.
That's right. Yeah, and you're remembering that too from our Wednesday night class about wilderness. Does mean desert, but they don't necessarily mean wilderness is more evocative of a kind of a situation. So then desert is evocative of a physical place. It's absolutely right.
Interesting.
Again, this was, oh yeah, Mary and then Leslie. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just, this is what flashed across my mind was what just happened yesterday.
Yeah.
And, the meaning of it, it's not the end of the story of the freedom of the people, but it's certainly a big part of it.
I'm so glad you brought it up, because it's I can't believe I didn't think about it, but you're absolutely right. And we, in kind of an initial reaction in our vestry meeting last night, we were talking about, and this is not easy to say, but again, as Christians, we look at the whole, we're really called to look at everybody's role, even though we know exactly, we know this is justice that was served, right? I think we can agree last night, justice was served, but it doesn't solve racism as much as some people might think it does. And it doesn't make everything all better because a man is still dead. And at the same time, this other man's life is ruined. And if we believe God, I'm not saying he didn't deserve it either. I'm just saying we wish we could have time machines to go back and say, Derek, do you want to rethink what you're doing right now? Because this is not going to end well. And Mary, you're absolutely right. Doesn't that sound like Pharaoh hardening his heart?
Yeah.
Don't you want to just let it go? Let him go. And yet that's what's happening. 100% on the buzz. This is exactly what the meaning is. And now you see what I mean by the Israelites' perspective here is like the Black experience in America in many ways. Yes. I know that, yes, something terrible is happening to this man who's now going to prison for life for a mistake. But in many ways, that's not the point. That's all that is a point, but it's not the point. The point is, this is a justice served and merely a step forward of progress for the Black community. Similarly here, Israel's story is not over and there's more to it. But in this moment, there was deliverance of justice, you could say, in Exodus and in the Black America yesterday. A preacher or somebody that's preaching on this would be able to probably articulate this better than I'm just rattling off top of my chest. So top of my chest?
Head.
My head. Thank you.
It's
Well,
just interesting that in the name of justice, somebody wins and somebody loses.
Exactly.
Well, I keep thinking about the poor teenage girl who videotaped it. She's a victim and she's going to be like
Traumatized.
traumatized for life. And thank God she did it though. Because
Right.
otherwise he would have never, he would just gotten away with it.
Yeah.
And this, isn't that a sad commentary that if it hadn't been on video,
Yeah, this is nothing new. This happens all the time.
Yeah.
It's just video. These phones are making Black Lives Matter possible.
Right. It's incredible.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so much, we talked about this last night too. There's so much nuance because it's not a black and white, pun intended, issue. There's so many things in there. There's so many things, the availability of technology, but also every aspect. I'm just off with no direction whatsoever. What about the other police officers who did nothing? What about all the police officers who are good cops who mean well, but are stuck in a system that doesn't train them well? You know, that trains them to be afraid of big, tall black people. You know, that's systemic. That's when we talk about systemic racism. You know, it's stuff they don't even realize that they're doing, and that they're set up to fail. You know, I think that's part of it, and yet at the same time, you have to be mindful of stop. At the end of the day, the person who died, like that's the worst. That's the worst. Derek Chauvin gets to live. But George Floyd is gone and nothing will bring him back. And I think that's where there is some reaction in social media of justice maybe not be the right word, even though that's technically what it is. It's more like a accountability, you know, but like you would a child, you know, you hit somebody, you go to timeout. And to make it as this crude metaphor, you know, and just like the Pharaoh metaphor, you know, you can't get away with that over time. You can't have an imbalance of power over people like that. It's not fair. You know, that's not right. And that's the part where we have to speak up for it because the world is not fair. That's part of the witness of scripture. And it's our job to try to mete out justice. So
Spiritually speaking,
Yeah.
George Floyd gets to live and Derek Chauvin gets to pine away in jail or whatever. He doesn't get to live really.
Right. We speak a lot in our tradition about we say the words rest in peace. And I wonder if it's taking on a new meaning when you have a soul that was taken violently. And, you know, they make movies about this stuff, about souls kind of being in limbo and things. And I do actually think we can feel like George Floyd, on behalf of many others, are resting in peace, you know, now that there was some kind of, you know, there was justice. You know, nobody's saying Derek Chauvin needs to die for his crimes. And in fact, I'm vehemently against capital punishment. Because again, Jesus, 2 wrongs don't make a right. But he deserves to be punished. But I don't know what, you know, executing him, I'm not saying that's even on the table. I'm just throwing out more contemporary situations where I don't know how killing someone else for killing became the solution. And I thought we had moved past it, but it keeps coming back, you know. There's another way to punish people, and that is by putting them in prison. So time out. Anyway, Mary, I'm so glad you made that connection, and because
Me too.
just kind of spaced on it. You're absolutely right. What else do
Yeah.
you all think? I kind of want to leave it here for the day in terms of the part we read, because we're going to
I
kind
want
of
you
go
to
back
get to your appointment on time.
so that I get a
Well,
good.
I do have a statement or something
go
to
ahead,
say
Leslie.
of this chapter. One of the source that David and I read, which is called the Bible for Normal People, but it's Exodus for Normal People, is the name of the book by Pete Enns, and he's great. But one of the things he does is he reflects the idea of the water saving in this chapter with Exodus 1 and 4 or 6, or Genesis 1 and 6, where he's talking about the creation of the waters and how important that the creation of the flood was part of saving people out of the sin of the world that was going on at the time.
Brilliant.
And so we had the flood where you saved 8 people and then you ended up with lots of people. I mean, I don't know how much of a story that is, but it's a story that they're trying to reflect the water, the importance of water.
You're
And we talk about the water in where he's in the pillar where the darkness and the light is good, and he lit up but he was in the process of saving and protecting his people back here in the light and the dark, which was good in the Genesis story. And then he's talking where he separates the water from the bottom, the water from the sky, without however that is. And so anyway, but to me that was important, where the water saving and the importance of the word of the wind. When the wind came up and separated it in Genesis, he also used the wind again in this chapter to talk about the separation of the water in the dry land where the people walk through. So anyway,
wonderful.
that's my 2 cents worth today.
You're
But
right.
I really enjoyed, actually this morning I reread the chapter in the book I'm reading to go along with this. And I just picked up some of these things again, just the importance of water, not in just here and in the flood, but also we have baptism in the Christian tradition, where we are separate, when we are made separate from, we are made a new creation, and we are separate from other people because of our baptism.
You're right. It's like Leslie and I planned this, because as you were talking, I opened it up to our baptismal rite, which we're going to be doing baptisms on May 23rd on Pentecost. And this is the prayer that was written for the 79 prayer book. So unique to our tradition. And I love this prayer. I love this prayer. Everybody during a baptism, this is the last thing they're listening to, because they're like, why is this taking so long? But it's so beautiful. And you all will know next time you hear it. And it goes like this. We thank you, Almighty God, for the gift of water. Over it, the Holy Spirit moved in the beginning of creation. Through it, you led the children of Israel out of their bondage in Egypt into the land of promise. In it, your son Jesus received the baptism of John and was anointed by the Holy Spirit as the Messiah, the Christ, to lead us through his death and resurrection from the bondage of sin into everlasting life. And it just makes the connection that you're making, Leslie, of water. And remember, it still is to this day for people that can't swim or are afraid of the ocean, or when riptides happen, water is scary. It's uncertain. It covers what's beneath it. You name your metaphor, it's all there. And for them to say that God separated the water and the sky from the water was like separating light from darkness, chaos and mystery, and separating out certainty and trust out of that. So the water that flooded the world in Noah's story is the same water that God spreads and becomes a vessel for saving these people. And so that then when you get down to baptism, the water, it's all this of a piece. It's all the same water that can take life, like that is the same water that gives life. And it's all intentional. It's all like the foundations of their tradition, the Jewish tradition and the Christian tradition. It's right there.
And Greg, the sprinkling of us, I don't know, you do this, don't you? You walk around, and that is super, it brings the whole community into this concept of connection. Yeah, it's wonderful.
It's called the Asperges, and
thank you. Yeah,
we'll be doing the baptisms outdoors on the 23rd, and we really have no limit on the number of people outdoors. So I'm actually thinking now, I haven't done this, that maybe we'll do that sprinkling. We'll just walk around and sprinkle people with the baptismal water too, since they're outdoors.
I always feel actually connected in some way. It's a wonderful tradition.
Yeah, thank you. I love it. Wow. Well, we did a lot. This was great. I hope it, and again, we're going to kind of go back over it with a couple more perspectives, because there's so much material about this. But I'm making a note to myself to bring Raiders of the Lost Ark and to bring or just make scans of the Bible sources revealed, the one that shows all the different traditions / schools / sources, so you can see it more visually. Sound good?
Yeah,
Thank
great.
you.
Thank you.
All right, thanks
Thank you.
everybody. Thanks for being
Thanks.
here. Have a good one.
Yeah. You too. Have a good checkup. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Yeah.